at the Hobart Supreme Court, Martin Bryant pleaded not guilty to all charges. His solicitor, Lieutenant Colonel David Gunson, then stood aside, and John Avery, a Newtown lawyer, took over Martin Bryant's case. At this very same time, John Avery was also representing Mrs. Carleen Bryant, Martin's mother, and Terry Hill, the Newtown gun dealer. And it was by using Mrs. Bryant to convince her son, Martin, that he had to plead guilty, that John Avery was able to have on the 7th of November 1996, where Martin Bryant appeared in court and pleaded guilty to all charges, and thus permitted his trial to be waived. Now, the information I put before you today comes from court documents in regard to the sentencing of Martin Bryant. On Sunday, the 28th of April 1996, Martin Bryant's journey from Newtown to Seascape Cottage was remembered by various witnesses as though to document this particular trip. Angelo Casarius from the Midway News Agency, Spiros Diamantes from the Sorrel Supermarket, which is a small store, it's not a Coles or Safeway. Then there was Gary King from the Shell service station at Fawcett, who served Bryant with some coffee between 11 a.m. and midday. And Martin sat in his car and drank that coffee for about 8 to 10 minutes. Then there was Christopher Hammond at Tirana, where Martin Bryant bought some petrol for the Volvo. Johnny Nichols, at about 12:30 p.m, witnessed the Volvo pass him, heading towards Hobart, and he actually saw the Volvo brake and turn right into Seascape Cottage. Martin Bryant arrived at Seascape Cottage at approximately 12:30 p.m. on the Sunday. Witnesses, Andrew Simmons and his wife Lynn, were outside their house opposite Seascape Cottage waiting for a car to pick Andrew up for a work seminar at Swansea, when they both heard 2 shots emanating from Seascape Cottage at 10:40 a.m. At this time, Martin Bryant was drinking coffee at Fawcett, as per the witness Gary King. Doug McCutcheon heard a series of rapidly fired shots emanating from Seascape, possibly 6 to 12 shots between 10 a.m. and possibly 11 a.m. And these shots were heard by 3 or 4 witnesses, occurred at least 100 minutes before Martin Bryant arrived at Seascape. Now, the prosecutor and DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Damien Buck, QC, told the Hobart Supreme Court that between 40 a.m. killed David and Sally Martin between an hour and 2 hours after the event. Anybody ever known what a spine to be read in the air? To remain suspended in animation for 1 to 2 hours? Neither have I. The fact that Constable Gary Whittle saw Mrs. Sally Martin naked, running around the backyard of Seascape Cottage, yelling and screaming after 2:30 p.m, and that the dog was barking, means that Miss Sally Martin was not shot at 10:40 a.m. In fact, according to a report by Sergeant Derek Dutton, Mrs. Sally Martin died from multiple fractures to the back of the skull, while David Martin was shot twice. David Martin was shot twice, the shots being heard by Andrew and Lynn Simmons at 10:40 a.m. when Martin Bryant was drinking coffee at the Shell service station at Fawcett, 58 kilometres away. Now, the gunman at Port Arthur. The first sighting of the gunman at Port Arthur was by Gay Lynn and her companion Vicky, whose van had broken down just outside Seascape Cottage due to overheating, and the girls had stopped and were letting the motor cool down before putting some water into the radiator. The Volvo sedan, complete with surfboard on top, pulled up behind their van, and the blonde-haired driver got out and asked what was wrong. Now, the blonde-haired driver must have had a nose for it, because he smelt the marijuana that Vicky had been smoking, and he asked if they had any for sale. And the 2 girls sold him small sacks of marijuana for $50, and he paid for it with a $50 note. He also told the girls that he was going to the Isle of the Dead to kill some wasps. And when the girls' van wouldn't start, he reached inside the van down to the battery, jiggled with the lead, says, "Here's your problem, you've got a loose lead, tightened it up for them, and off the van went. Now this was not Martin Bryant for three obvious reasons. One, Martin Bryant never smoked and he never partook in drugs, including marijuana. Two, Martin Bryant knew nothing about the electrical systems of motor cars. He was an idiot and he suffered from schizophrenia. And three, Martin Bryant knew nothing about the two coachloads of American tourists who had arrived at Seascape at the Port Arthur Historic Site at approximately 12:30 p.m. So how did this person know about the two busloads of American tourists? And why did this person tell the girls he was going to the Isle of the Dead to kill some wasps? The Tasmania police had strict instructions they were not to shoot the gunman. You've got a siege situation. You've got a bloke firing 250 rounds at you and the police are not allowed to reply. Never happened in my day. The Deputy Commissioner were not permitted to defend themselves and to shoot the gunman. One, there were very strict rules of engagement. Two, if the police had shot the gunman, then that would have required a coronial inquiry. Neither of these two explanations stand up to scrutiny. However, one of the police negotiators between Sergeant Terry McCarthy and Martin Bryant, we have Martin Bryant talking to the police negotiator while somebody in the next room is firing an SKK. When we read the transcript, the police negotiator transcript, there were 20 such gunshots recorded on the police negotiator case. 20. While Sergeant Terry McCarthy was talking to Martin Bryant. In other words, Martin Bryant was not the gunman. So who was the gunman at Seascape Cottage? It was recorded that Martin Bryant's companion inside Seascape Cottage was called Rick. Police and the media put forward the idea that Rick was actually the hostage Glenn Pearce, but that is not correct. After reading the police negotiator transcripts, we realised that Martin Bryant knows Rick quite well, has met Rick's wife and is aware of the family connections and that the family resides in Lauderdale in Tasmania, and that Rick is a top member of the Tasmania Police SOD. It also becomes rather obvious that Rick was running the show. Rick is actually Mick Dyson, or to give him his full name, Sergeant Michael Charles Dyson of the Tasmania Police Special Operations Group. And that is why the police were instructed they were not to shoot the gunman. The gunman at Seascape Cottage was Sergeant Michael Charles Dyson. The fire at Seascape Cottage. Now this is a quote from Superintendent Bob Fielding, the officer in charge of the police forward command post at Corona. At the end of the day, I'm satisfied that we made the right decision. In fact, waiting and forcing him to come to us as opposed to vice versa. Now, that was made on the 29th of April 1996. Now, just exactly what the Superintendent Bob Fielding told us here. He has just told us that the Tasmania Police forced the gunman, Martin Bryant, to come to them. But how did the police do that? It's the only thing that forced Martin Bryant out of Seascape Cottage was the fire at Seascape Cottage. This being the case, the only thing we can have is that Bob Fielding has just admitted that Seascape Cottage was set fire by the Tasmania Police. In actual fact, the fire was set by